Hello to all of you who are viewing and listening to this. I'm Titus Pressler, Executive Director of the Global Episcopal Mission Network. I'm sitting with the Reverend Canon Walter Brownridge from the Diocese of Vermont and Secretary to the Global Episcopal Mission Network. Walter, you know what my opening question is?
Yes.
What is your mission story?
Well, my mission story, Titus, is that I was privileged to be a appointed missionary in the early 2000s, the aughts, from 2003 to 2006 in Cape Town, South Africa. And it was there I served at St. George's Cathedral, Cape Town. My wife, Tina, and our sons, Martin and Alec, we arrived. They were 8 years old and 13 years old. And my mission story has a long story that predates that, but I'll just say that I had long an interest in South Africa going back to the 70s as a high school student and then later in college. And I, after serving in our U.S. military, I was in graduate school in California studying international relations, and I became an Episcopalian and Anglican through my study of a South African, and that was Archbishop Desmond Tutu, as I studied the role of the church in confronting, as well as some elements of the wider church supporting apartheid. And it was then nearly 20 years later that I found myself living and serving in the church in South Africa, in the new and democratic South Africa. And my mission story is how being a Christian in another country is always, I think, expanding of a Christian's understanding of who they are as a Christian, because you're in a different context than your American Western cultural norm. But even if you're in another Western country, even there, it shifts you. But being in a non-Western context, and I first knew that when I was a Marine and serving in Japan, where Christianity is such a minority. Well, the difference in South Africa was, while it is religiously very diverse, it is in many ways a deeply, that goes back to colonialism, a deeply Christian culture. But it's not just a Christian culture. The story of the church's struggle against apartheid, and even up to this day, the story of how the church seeks to, I think, live out the baptismal covenant of promoting the dignity of every human being, I found, for me, best expressed in how the church carried itself. There are so many stories that I can't recount all of them, but I would say, as a priest, and I was only ordained 3 years when I arrived in South Africa, but I began to understand as a priest the weight of how just wearing a collar, carrying on the office of a priest and being a Christian helps. And the one short story I'll say, and then I'll finish, was I was actually flying to London, in the UK, for a meeting. And I show up at the airport and I'm wearing my collar. And the custom is the porters come and actually from the parking lot help you with your bags and take you in. And this South African man, a black South African, of course I gave him a tip. But before I gave him the tip, he said, "I'm going to have a good day today." And I says, "I hope you do." And he says, "But I'm going to have a good day because I helped you as a priest, as a holy man," as they say in Afrikaans, man from God. And it just touched me, not for my own personal sense, but how deeply spiritual the people are there, even those that profess agnosticism or atheism. And part of it is the South African story of liberation couldn't have happened without Christian witness. And so they made me a better Christian. And they truly, particularly the clergy that I worked with, and who formed me, I think, made me, as I was growing into my priesthood, a better priest. And it stayed with me now 20 years later. That's my mission story.
Thank you so much, Walter. Can I just ask another question? You went with your family.
Yes.
What were the ramifications of that mission experience for the family?
Well, I think my wife and I, Tina, we've been married 41 years. And even before we had children, we talked about what it would be like to have children. And we talked about, we were both kind of, I think, aspiring global citizens. And we wanted our children to have that experience. And while they were at first, our sons, Alec and Martin, were reluctant when we told them, they knew they didn't have much choice and that they were going to go to Africa. And they are now 29 and 34. And they have told my wife and I many times how grateful they were to go, to be a global citizen. And it is carried with them their whole life in talking about global perspectives. Both of them in college, in some aspect, did international studies or peace studies. They spent semesters abroad, Alec in Japan and Martin in Brazil. All of that was shaped by the experience of living in a culture, in a country that is not your home, and in a culture that is not your culture. And yet we were treated as being at home. They're still considered family. I was just in South Africa in March, and people wanted to know about how are the children, how's your wife, and that connection we still have. So I would say this for families. I'll just add this as a commercial. People who are maybe considering mission and wonder about children or spouse, I think because as in South Africa, God provides that your reasonable fears can be addressed, your reasonable concerns, I'd say, but it will enhance children like beyond your imagination. I know that because your children who lived with you and Jane in Zimbabwe, I've met them as adults, and they are incredible human beings. And I think part of it was they grew up part of their life young as in a different culture and space.
Without question. Yeah. Well, Walter, thank you so much. Thank you for your witness. Thank you for your reflection.
Thank you so much.
God bless you in your continuing global mission work.
Thank you so much, Titus.